How's it going, ladies and bruises? I'm Bobby Sixkilla and welcome back to Root Double. We just finished erasing En's malice, subject En's malice from Jun Mortabei's mind. So hopefully she's saved. And I guess Salyu is next, or Kazami. Ina is here, but she doesn't seem to be infected, so we shall see. Natsuhiko and Yuri return to reality. The first thing Natsuhiko saw was Jun slowly falling down with the engine cutter still in hand. Jun? Natsuhiko promptly caught Jun by her hand. An intense shock ran through his body, and a pain ran through his wounds, and yet he still did not let go. But his body wasn't the only thing in pain. Pain ran through his head again, just like what happened when he erased the subject N inside of Ukita. He was also struck with that bizarre discomfort that seemed like his brain was being shaken. The pain and discomfort were clearly more intense this time. Hikaden? Don't tell me it's happening again. Yuri raised her voice when she noticed something wrong with Natsuhiko, but he promptly replied with telepathy. Yuri, please don't bring that up now. Just as I feared, it looks like my brain takes damage each time I come into contact with subject N. But please don't say that out loud here. It'll just make everyone worry. It won't improve our fortunes at all. So please, let's keep this a secret. Yuri looked at Natsuhiko in worry, but she eventually replied with telepathy. Okay, but please don't force yourself. Natsuhiko nodded at those words. Don't force myself, huh? He appreciated the sentiment, but there was no way he could take Yuri up on those words. No matter how much damage his brain took, he had to keep fighting Subject N until everyone was free from malice. In the same way that Watase had tried to save everyone no matter how much damage his body took. Haha, now isn't that exciting? Will my brain crumble first, or will I erase Subject N's malice first? It's a battle of wits. A smile of bravado formed on Natsuhiko's lips. Ina and Ukita called out to him as he waited for his headache to subside. What's wrong, Mr. Tenkawa? Do your wounds hurt? Yeah, a little, but Jun's more important right now. Jun, are you okay, Jun? After Natsuhiko called her name, Jun eventually groaned. Huh? Natsuhiko? Yuri? With vacant eyes, Jun looked at each person in the shelter one by one, and then, as if realizing something, she gasped. What have I done? Jun, are you fully conscious now? Yeah, but that's odd. I was completely bonkers just a moment ago, wasn't I? Did I just suddenly go back to normal or something? Natsuhiko was relieved to hear those words from Jun. That's fine then. The you right now is the original you. The original me? Long story short, there's something in this facility that caused people to become aggressive and paranoid, much like who you were until just now. Huh? Why's that? That girl you found in front of the cargo lift? She was a powerful communicator. She had the power to change the minds of those around her into ones full of malice. And because of that, everyone inside the facility went crazy. No way. BC has that sort of power? It does. Though, I do realize how unbelievable it is. Jun looked a bit dubious for a while, but judging by what happened to me, I guess I have to believe it, huh? Wait, did Mr. Ukita go crazy for the same reason? Yeah, but having said that, I don't expect you to forgive me for attacking you. Ukita and Jun looked at each other awkwardly. A little while later, Jun politely bowed her head. No, I should be the one to apologize. I chased you around with an engine cutter and said extremely rude things and was going to chop you to pieces. No, it's okay, I deserve at least that much disparagement. It seemed that the discord between the two of them was settled for now. Ina took a deep breath and whispered to Natsuhiko. Thanks for trusting me, Mr. Tenkawa. Looks like you were able to tie things up. No, it's all thanks to you, Professor. It was a really big help that you weren't infected with malice, Miss Ina. Natsuhiko and Yuri bowed their heads in gratitude. Don't be foolish, you two. It's too early to celebrate, you know. Huh? Judging by what we saw of Miss Mortabei, those infected with malice aren't aware of it themselves, right? In that case, you can't be entirely sure that I'm not infected with malice, can you? Once Natsuhiko heard that, he promptly stood between Ina and Yuri. But Ina just placed her gun on the floor and spoke with a smile. Don't panic, I'm probably not infected, but I still want you to check my mind, just in case. Just in case? Yes, besides, doesn't it bother you kids to know you don't know my true identity? Her true identity did indeed bother him. Ina said she was a member of something that was like a police, so it probably had something to do with that. What do I do? How should I go about memory access this time around? Ina Max, Natsuhiko 1. That's what we've already got. Let's roll. For now, what he needed to confirm was Ina's true identity and what motivated her to mobilize in Labo today, as well as whether or not she was infected with malice. Should I look in detail, or just do a quick check? I get the feeling I should do a quick check, but that's what he thought for a second. And then another thought suddenly welled up in his gut. No, I want to know about Professor Tsubakiyama in detail. There are too many mysteries about her, and besides, you want to know more about who Ena was inside. Understood. Allow me to peek into your memories, Professor. But it's not like I'm peeking because I doubt you or anything. That's right. It's just so we can believe you from the bottom of our hearts. Ena smiled at Natsuhiko and Yuri's words. Thanks, you two. I'll open my heart for real this time, and remember, what you see in my head is the truth of this country. And as Ena gave them that veiled warning, the kids walked up to her. Oh man, I'm worried this is going to turn out crazy. An activated sense sympathy. What does she know? Like, it's clear she knows some, but there's some stuff she doesn't know. What else does she know, though? It was 16 years ago, back when Ena was still 8 years old. She was strolling around town with the father she loved. Ena, this is where Daddy works now. Oh, wow, it's such a pretty building. Ena's father took her to his workplace. He gently responded to her innocent voice. It's called the Parapsychology Research Center. It's a somewhat odd facility that's been studying things like ESP for a long time. You see, what we call ESP was recently proven to actually exist. ESP? Wow. Exciting, isn't it? All the grown-ups are really excited about the discovery too. And so this place is set to get a lot of new staff members, so Daddy's been reassigned here too. So you're gonna study ESP too, Daddy? No, Daddy's a government official, not a researcher. So what will you do then, Daddy? I'm gonna protect the Espers. Protect them? From who? From the bad guys. So far, Espers have been bullied a lot, and what's worse is that nobody stood up to protect them. Poor things. I know, so that's why we established a post to protect the Espers since they need protection. If an Esper gets bullied, we'll protect them from the bad guys. On the other hand, if an Esper misuses their power, then we'll stop them. It's a very rewarding duty. That's so cool, you're like a policeman. I guess. After all, we are a sort of BC police, I guess. I want to do work like you when I grow up too. Oh, sounds good. I guess I look forward to the day when we can work together. Ena's father smiled. Ena looked forward to that day to come as well. But about half a year afterwards, she realised that day would never come. September 16th, 2014. The Great Rokume City Arson. The events of that night would later be called by that name. Fires broke out all at the same time at 15 different spots in Rokume City, starting with the Rokume City Hospital. Various buildings such as civilian residences, public facilities, multi-tenant buildings and apartments were indiscriminately set fire to, and were burned down in that one single night. 118 casualties. Among them were 67 deaths due to carbon monoxide poisoning, 34 deaths due to fire, 11 deaths due to falling from higher places, 3 deaths due to shock, and 2 suicides. And finally, 1 person stabbed to death by an arsonist. The one stabbed was an ordinary civil servant. To those who did not know him, he was just another one of the 118 lives lost that night. But not to Ena. To Ena, he was her beloved, irreplaceable father. Several days after the fires, Ena visited her father's workplace alone. Daddy. No matter how many times she called out, there was no answer. She would never hear that gentle voice again. The tears that had streamed down on the day of the funeral service dampened her cheeks once again. Her father had been killed that day trying to protect someone from an arsonist. Ena didn't know who her father had died protecting. But even without knowing who it was, she understood one thing. Daddy was probably trying to protect an Esper. From the bad guys. Ena looked up to the sky and swore to protect what her father had tried to. To one day take up the same work her father had. Daddy, I'll keep my promise, so please watch over me in heaven until then, okay? For a young girl like her, it was still a lofty dream, but Ena swore on that dream in her heart nevertheless as she wiped her tears. After she lost her beloved father, Ena and her mother moved away from Rokume City to a neighbouring town. Her mother refused to stay in a town that served as a constant reminder of sad memories. But even in the new town, Ena grew to follow in her deceased father's footsteps. She continued to pursue a job to protect communicators just like her father had, but it was by no means an easy path to follow. For her father was a government official at the ESP Bureau, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology, MEXT. The ESP Bureau, founded in April 2014, was the organisation single-handedly responsible for the administration of BC-related activities. She had thought that by entering that organisation she'd be able to obtain the same work as her father, but once she got into middle school and started investigating her father's life, she noticed something curious. For some reason, all employment records of him beyond his assignment to the PRC in April 2014 had been erased. And there was an absolute dearth of information on what sort of work he did for the 5 months leading up to his death on September 16th. What's the meaning of this? Is he doing some sort of special work? When Ina questioned her about the anomaly, her tight-lipped mother eventually caved in and spoke about her husband's work. Ina's father was a communicator commissioner. Communicator commissioners managed and protected communicators outside of the public eye. With that knowledge, Ina pursued her father's footsteps even more fervently. She majored in parapsychology at university, earning exceptional grades, and as she graduated, she slipped through all the obstacles to enter the ESP bureau. Before she knew it, 13 years had passed since her father's death. On her first day at the ESP bureau, Ina went to greet her direct superiors. In a certain building in Tokyo, Ina opened the door and went inside a room. "Excuse me." On the other side of the door were 2 men. They turned to look at Ina and spoke up. "Oh, you must be the new girl. I am Ina Tsubakiyama, newly assigned here today. Pleasure to work with you." "I'm Curator, Chief Communicator Commission Division 1, and I'm Commissioner Higa of the same division." "Well, no need to be so stiff. We may be teased as a sort of BC police, but we're not actually police, obviously, so relax." "Yes, thank you, sir." Despite her words, Ina didn't relax her posture at all. The man named Curator smiled wryly to see that as he spoke up to her. "Well, okay then, how about we change the topic? I'm sure you're aware of this, but we're in charge of various administrative duties regarding BC-related activities. Our work is quite extensive, ranging from communicator protection, management and observation, all the way to the exposure of BC-related crimes. Our staff consists of people transferred not only from not only MEXT, but also the police agency, public security, and the Ministry of Health, Labour and Welfare. Anyway, at best we're a team of experts, and at worst we're a ragtag gang of misfits. At any rate, the situation around communicators has gotten tense over the years and outgrown what the MEXT can handle by itself. So compared to when your father was with us, we've been strengthened into quite a large-scale organisation." "Huh? Chief Curator, you knew my father?" "He was my superior when I was young. He taught me quite a few things. I am truly in his debt. Back in those days, there weren't any more than 10 of us, including me and Chief Tsubakiyama, but now we've grown into quite an extensive family." "Is that so?" Ina was pleased to have met someone who knew her father professionally. "Now then, daughter of Chief Tsubakiyama, what sort of commissioner do you wish to be?" "I want to be like my father, a commissioner who will protect the communicators even at the cost of my own life." "I see." Curator smiled sadly at that declaration. "I don't want you to become like your father." "Huh? I understand why you'd want to follow in your father's footsteps, but you still lack awareness of the true dangers of communicators. And because of that lack of awareness, you'll end up with the same fate as your father." Curator watched Ina as she caught the meaning of those words. What gives us that awareness was, unfortunately, the communicator who was under Chief Tsubakiyama's protection. She was the communicator brought into the PRC as a BC research subject. Codenamed Communicator A. Well, no wonder, Jesus. Unlike your ordinary communicators, she possessed an extremely dangerous ability known as Sense Sympathy. Sense Sympathy? That was an ability that even Ina, a parapsychology major, had never heard of. It's only natural that you haven't heard of it. Its very existence is hidden throughout the country. It's extremely dangerous even compared to the other BC abilities. The reason we manage communicators so strictly is directly related to that danger. Curator explained the ability to Ina: sensory sharing, memory manipulation, memory erasure, and the final phenomenon associated with the ability, the collapse of the communicator's mind. With repeated usage of sense sympathy, the communicator's senses of self would cease to function, and at the same time they become a lump of malice, spreading curse-filled thoughts throughout their surroundings. But it was hard for Ina to believe. Is that true? I wouldn't get anything out of lying about it, would I? In any case, Communicator A used sense sympathy on countless occasions throughout her lifetime, and in the end she became a lump of malice. Why, for what purpose would A use such a dangerous ability? There was no reason for her to use it, was there? Did my father or any of the PRC researchers not stop it? A bad feeling welled up in Ina's chest as she watched Curator fall silent. Don't tell me the PRC researchers forced her to use sense sympathy, all for the sake of BC research. No. Curator forcefully interrupted Ina. Many people make that misunderstanding both in and out of our organisation, but the reality is completely different. At the time, the PRC was exerting all its efforts in an attempt to cure Communicator A. She didn't become a lump of malice after coming to Japan. She was already showing symptoms when she was in her homeland in France. Huh? As Ina's eyes widened, Curator handed her an old newspaper article. This article's about the Andrassy witch hunt. Good, you know your stuff. It's because I researched documents on my own back in my school days. As Ina majored in parapsychology, she gained a fairly deep understanding of the history of BC. And from there, she learned the details of this particular incident as well. There was a modern witch hunt incident in February 2014 in Andrewson. The victim, Alice N. Flame, was a girl who was 18 years old at the time of the incident. Ever since she was young, she demonstrated various abilities, and as a result, she was shunned by people around her, including her biological parents. Regardless, Alice's parents profited off her abilities. They founded a new religion, labeling Alice as a child of God and her telepathy as oracles, as they ripped money off believers in what was essentially fraud. Those fooled resented her. Her parents never loved her, and instead used her as a part of a money-making scheme day after day. Her spirit must have worn down considerably. Years went by, and by the time she turned 16, a new phenomenon occurred. Lawyers who had sued the religious organization for fraud were inexplicably falling victim to memory loss and stupefaction, one after another. The local police hypothesized that religious officials had used some form of drug to induce memory defects in the lawyers, but the lawyers' bodies showed no sign of drug reactions, and thus the investigation made no developments. One day, the dark side of the church was brought to light. A certain scientist had established a genetic test to determine BC aptitude. Townspeople began to recognize the existence of communicators. Eventually, people investigating the religious organization's illegal acts began to think, is Alice actually a communicator and not a child of God? To check their suspicions, they ran a genetic test on Alice and found a result that nobody had ever seen before: IGF2R gene abnormality type S. Alice was the world's first confirmed rank S aptitude communicator. Fraud victims and believers alike were enraged at the test results. The child of God we believed in was just an ordinary human with a genetic mutation. Alice is nothing but a filthy phony who used bizarre powers granted to her by her defective genes to deceive people. Her power is by no means a power of God, rather it is a power of the devil, a witch's power. The devoutly faithful had clung on to that delusion. Their resentment for having been deceived intensified, and in conjunction with their fear of communicators, their malice reached critical heat, and the people became insurgents. The building that served as both the church and inflamed family home was set aflame. Alice's parents died in the fire, but Alice herself narrowly escaped the burning church, and the next morning, once the local firefighters had her in protective care, an abnormal spectacle unfurled. A group of insurgents who tried to attack Alice all lost consciousness and fell around her, and afterwards Alice went missing. Those are the details of the Andrewsay witch hunt, the incidents that became the first page in the book of the anti-communicator terrorism. It was an incident that Enna had already known about, but by connecting what she had just heard from Curator, she realized a new truth. It's not written in the article, but could Alice have used sense sympathy? So then, was the string of incidents of lawyers losing their memories as a result of Alice using memory manipulation, and the insurgents fainting as a result of her using that ability in self-defense? But there was a more important matter at hand. Enna questioned Curator with a trembling voice. Why would you show me this article? Does this incident have something to do with my father? Of course. The communicator that your father was protecting while he was alive was that very same Alice in Flame, later known as Communicator A. Curator continued as Enna gasped in astonishment. After the witch hunt, worldwide communicator discrimination and persecution became a frequent occurrence. But at the same time, Rokume City and the PRC worked against that trend, promoting protection for communicators. Discriminated communicators were recommended to migrate to Rokume City, and in exchange for becoming test subjects for BC research, they'd receive financial aid for their entire livelihood. It was a win-win situation for both the communicators who wished to live in peace and the PRC who wished to advance BC research. And miraculously enough, the first communicator to be received by the PRC, as well as the first to be put under Chief Tsubakiyama's protective care, was none other than Communicator A. No way, that can't be! It is unbelievable, isn't it? Try reading this then. Curator handed Enna a printed stack of papers. This is a journal of A's probation, as written by Chief Tsubakiyama. It was left in his government-provided computer. It appears to not be an official report log, but a simple personal journal. This document is an extreme necessity in order to understand what happened in this town at the time. Enna read her father's journal as instructed. It was a very informal journal, and it was a record of the after days Alice had experienced when she survived and overcome the crime that had come before. April 5th. Today began the first communicator probation of one who was shown into Rokume City and the PRC from the outside. I'm the commissioner in charge of it. In the MEXT, I had advanced through the fields of education and developmental psychology. I guess my personal history has been held in high regard. And then there's Assistant Commissioner Curator, a young man who transferred from the National Police Agency. He's a master of Taiho Jutsu and Nippon Kempo. So it seems he'll be also doubling as my bodyguard. But to provide me with a bodyguard must mean that the upper ranks seem cautious regarding the current subject under protection. It's not unreasonable. After all, the communicator I've been put in charge of is none other than Alice in Flame. But now that I've actually met her, Alice is an 18-year-old girl with innocent features appropriate for her age. Perhaps due to the cruel persecution she faced in her hometown, her eyes are always full of fear. She's only just now come to Japan, so perhaps the culture shock is another cause for her fear. We must protect her. There are efforts to hide Alice's past, so researchers at the PRC have given her the designation Communicator A. But isn't that name just a little too blunt? She's not a literal lab rat, for crying out loud. So at least in this journal of mine, I'll call her Alice, because names are important. April 7th. The researchers in charge of Alice have been chosen. The leader of the research team is Azumi. He's an extremely reliable friend of mine from our school days. I can leave Alice in his care without qualms. Alice is still frightened, but it's been time to slowly get her to open her heart to us. May 5th. A month has passed since Alice arrived in Japan. She appears to be overcoming her fear and growing accustomed to the new environment, little by little each day. At the start, we were unable to initiate any sort of communication, but gradually, she's been showing compliance with our intentions. Curator, Azumi, and I all receive Alice with gentleness from the bottom of our hearts, but Alice seems to open her heart the most to Azumi. I'm somewhat jealous, but my wife and Ina are waiting for me at home, so it's not like I'm bitter about it or anything. But Curator's single, so he's really bitter. Poor guy. May 13th. As the days of deep experimentation pass, we've taught Alice a few things about Japan. As a result, today Alice learned her first Japanese word, konnichiwa, an awkward but understandable greeting. But when I heard it, it reminded me of the first time Ina spoke, so I was moved. We were so happy that we all answered repeatedly in Alice's native language. Bonjour, bonsoir, salut, merci. I don't know what that one is. C'est si bon, très bien, and so forth. Everything we could think of. Those last few didn't really have much to do about anything. And we probably butchered the pronunciation, but when she heard our broken French, Alice just smiled a little bit. May 27th. The PRC has other research teams beside ours. They're each in charge of a different communicator and conduct various experiments and ability training exercises. Today we exchange information with a different team. Researcher Miyoko Tenkawa and Shun Tenkawa, aka Communicator S, they're quickly showing several results. They're taking a parapsychology approach, but they seem to be using physics techniques to explain what exactly the ability called BC is. You'd expect nothing less from the married couple of our country's highest aptitude communicator and the youngest genius physicist. Something truly motivating is how Miyoko Tenkawa keeps her sharp tongue and pointed opinions despite being 8 months pregnant. June 22nd. A major incident happened today. Miyoko Tenkawa suddenly went into labour and was taken to hospital. Those of us left in the PRC were worried about her, but it seems that she had a safe delivery. Even the aloof Mr. Shun Tenkawa seemed to shed streams of tears upon seeing the birth of his son. When we explained the situation to Alice, she too smiled with her whole face. It seems the birth of a new life is a joyous occasion in all cultures. June 29th. It seems Curator is a smoker, which is odd these days. I must not be paying enough attention to not have noticed it. Right when Curator went to the designated area to smoke, Alice just happened to be walking by, and upon seeing the light as flame, she burst into tears. It probably triggered memories of when her house was set on fire. It wasn't Curator's fault, but he needs to be reprimanded. Azumi stroked her hair until she calmed down. In the same way, one comforts a crying child. July 2nd. At any rate, lately, the eyes Azumi looks at Alice with don't seem to be the eyes of a researcher. They're the eyes of affection. Perhaps the affection of a parent. Perhaps the affection of a lover. Alice seems to care for Azumi as well. Not once in his life had Azumi spoken of love. He dedicated his entire life to research. But perhaps spring has finally come for him. Or am I just thinking too hard here? At any rate, I can only pray for happiness in the future. July 5th. A problem occurred. A citizen group has risen up in opposition of how Rokume City is attracting communicators. The problem isn't them, but rather Alice's reaction to them. On some days like yesterday, the citizen group carries out demonstrations in front of the PRC. They've been chanting in unison with a megaphone, like a classic protest. They probably believe in their own brand of justice as they advocate their opinions, but Alice's reaction to them is not in the least bit trivial. She plugged her ears, cried out loud, cowered and trembled, almost like a child. Her panic attack continued until we had to sedate her. The citizen group probably triggered memories of the arson incident she encountered in her hometown. She came all the way to the safe haven in order to escape from that terrifying memory, and yet once again she fell victim to persecution. July 11th. Once again, the citizen group protested, except this time they trespassed directly into the facility. They were thrown out by the security guards, but it's still discomforting. July 15th. Today, a group of so-called freelance journalists came to collect data. They were apparently pursuing the trial of the Andrus A. witch hunt. Every time people come by, Alice becomes horribly terrified. Damn it, what's so fun about exposing her past? To hell with your so-called freedom of the press and social justice. July 30th. Something seems odd about Alice recently. It's not like she's having panic attacks like earlier, but her reactions just seem dulled. Her eyes often seem empty at times, as if she's not looking at anything. Sometimes her ears are deaf to even Azumi's voice. Why did it turn out this way? We're desperately trying to find the cause, but we have no clues to speak of. There are way too many unknown factors about communicators and the ability known as BC itself. But this is no time to be at a loss. We can't just label the unknown as the unknown and leave it as it is. We're writing the history of parapsychology with Alice. August 11th. Alice's mental condition is only getting worse, and it's a completely different beast from normal mental disorders. For example, we thought she might be displaying symptoms of ASD or PTSD, but this is clearly different. First, her sense of self is becoming extremely fragile. She often loses sight of who exactly she is. On the other hand, she often speaks of completely different people's personalities as if they were her own. Some parts of her disorder resemble dissociative identity disorder or schizophrenia, but it differs on a fundamental level. She's in a state of literal loss of self. For convenience, we've named this disorder the enification, nobodyification phenomenon. The cause of the enification phenomenon is still unknown. It is a universal disorder among communicators. Is it a universal disorder among communicators, or is it an effect of excessive use of BC? I'm worried about Alice's condition, but Azumi's anxiety is also hard to watch. He wants to cure Alice of her enification at all costs. I'll try to give it my best effort as well. August 16th. We went to seek advice about Alice from the Tenkawas, who were on parental leave. But it doesn't seem like they can think of a cause or solution either. On the way back, we came across a citizen group. Curator nearly threw a fist at them, but I frantically stopped him. It's not like hurting them would help Alice's mind recover at all. September 8th. The problem ailing Alice has gotten even worse. She's been acting bizarrely with indiscriminate and continuous use of telepathy. The exact contents of her telepathy are hard to describe objectively, but in a single word, it's a curse. The curse is completely plastered over with negative emotions. This telepathy from Alice is like a lump of malice, and she's begun to transmit it indiscriminately, and that malice, believe it or not, seems to propagate to the surrounding people. The PRC researchers who received her telepathy all fell into a mental state of extreme aggression, anxiety, or unrest. Some of the ones with especially severe reactions were Edoguchi and Kashiwagi. I get the feeling that this is no ordinary telepathy. A bizarre phenomenon often accompanies this telepathy that doesn't occur with normal telepathy transmission. Memory flashbacks, mental illness, etc. We have dubbed this telepathy NBC, Negative Beyond Communication, as a temporary name. The effects of NBC appear to be temporary, but the researchers and I have realized that Alice's condition has become dangerous. As an emergency measure, we've decided to confine Alice to the PRC basement. It's been decided that the only option is to keep her asleep with continuous administration of sleep medication. It pains my heart so much to have to do this to her, but if we don't do it, then her NBC will contaminate the minds of everyone around her. It's not like we can just keep her asleep forever, but then what can we do? What if we could at least reinforce the walls of the PRC with a material that could intercept NBC? That worthless delusion was the only idea I could conceive. Azumi, Curator, and I are all on the brink of despair, but nevertheless, I believe that one day we can cure Alice. I might not have a single bright idea to bring to the table, but if we lose even the hope in our hearts, then that'll be the end for sure. September 14th. About a week has passed since Alice went to sleep. The situation hasn't taken a single turn for the better. As long as she sleeps, she's safe, but the moment she wakes up, she becomes an extreme hazard. However, if we leave her sleeping like this forever, she's as good as dead, so we need to establish a facility that can treat her needs right away. What such a facility needs is, first of all, a means to prevent Alice's NPC from leaking outside the facility, and thus all the walls inside the facility should be made with a high-tech BC insulator. Implementation of such a BC insulator is now rapidly progressing, thanks to Dr. Miyoko Tenkawa. Also, since Alice will be unable to leave the facility, it must be sufficiently accommodating to her living needs. The site of the facility must be large enough to house an infirmary, offices, residential quarters, and other such amenities. In order to prevent the influence of her NPC, all the researchers that come into contact with her will need equipment, devices, or possibly medication that can protect the mind from BC. Furthermore, to protect Alice from external enemies like the Citizen Group, the facility also needs a superior defense system. Facilities like the PRC are deficient in the above requirements. It may be outrageous for a single government official like me to wish for the establishment of such a facility, but the issue is no longer just Alice's problem. As long as the cause of enification remains unknown, many more communicators may subsequently fall victim to the same condition as Alice. Even Mr. Shun Tenkawa may one day fall victim to enification. There are no guarantees. I shall petition ESP Bureau headquarters. No matter how many times they reject me, I have to keep trying. September 16th. I returned from the Tokyo ESP Bureau headquarters at night. The researchers staying at the PRC notified me that Alice had disappeared. She appeared to have escaped from the PRC basement on her own. Edoguchi apparently went to change out her IV, but he encountered some sort of trouble, and thus she escaped. The details of exactly what trouble are unknown. Edoguchi is currently in a state of extreme agitation and confusion, so no information can be obtained from him. Curator and I are currently searching for Alice. It's way too nerve-wracking. The journal ended on September 16th, the night of the great Rokume City arson. As Yena finished reading, she muttered in dumbfoundment. My father really was in charge of Communicator A's protection. Yes, that's what he devoted himself to. The cause of enification is currently still unclear, but it is said that the most likely cause is the overuse of sense sympathy. By the time A had gone from France to Japan, her enification had already progressed considerably. As a result of the dedicated efforts of Chief Tsubakiyama and the researchers at the PRC, she temporarily regained tranquility, but the truth of the matter was that her mind was already on the brink of collapse. Unfortunately, at the time of her arrival, Rokume City was rife with the citizen group's anti-BC demonstrations. The persecution of that citizen group triggered A's enification to progress all the way to completion. The malice she had held back came gushing forth. The completely enified A escaped from the PRC, and then that tragedy occurred. What tragedy? The Great Rokume City arson? Yeah. No way, you mean the Great Rokume City arson was caused by A? Yeah, 15 people infected with A's malice committed various crimes throughout the city that night. And for some reason, half of those crimes were arson. Most likely as an influence of A's thoughts. Commissioner Tsubakiyama and I looked all over town to protect A. And we finally found her. Late at night, on September 16th, she was in Rokume Park. Right at that time, a man infected with malice was trying to stab A to death with a knife. Commissioner Tsubakiyama was stabbed trying to protect A. The stunned culprit tried to run away, but I apprehended him. The problem was what came afterwards. I didn't know how to resolve the situation. I was so afraid of being infected with malice that I couldn't approach A. But if I left her alone, then even more people would be infected with malice. In all seriousness, the entire town could have burned to the ground, and I couldn't do a thing about it. In the end, it was Commissioner Tsubakiyama that saved the city. Even though he sustained heavy injuries and became infected with malice, he injected A with medication to put her to sleep. What? After A had been taken back to the PRC, Commissioner Tsubakiyama was brought to the hospital, but it was already too late. The town survived in exchange for his life. Ina was at a loss for words. She could say nothing about her father's heroic life and death. And that incident triggered the government to finally understand the gravity of the situation. And after just 2 years, the government put forth some serious efforts. The BC law was put into place and Rokume City became a government-designated top-secret city. And Labour was established, among other things. They recognised the deteriorating social climate and strengthened the ESP Bureau as well, and been given authority to equal the police in regards to BC-related crimes. A spent around 2 more years confined in the PRC, but once Labour was established, she was transferred there. Labour may be a BC research facility, but it's also a facility for the confinement and treatment of enified communicators. It's the fortress Chief Tsubakiyama had wished for in life. But before she could be cured, A died a year after her transfer, and thus, the incident reached its conclusion. Ina gulped and then looked at Curator in the eyes as she spoke. Is that the true history behind this town? It is. Now do you understand why I said I don't want you to become like your father? The person Chief Tsubakiyama risked his life to protect was a mind-maddening monster. If you act on your desire to just protect communicators without knowing that fact, you very well may face the same fate as your father. Are you sure you still want to do this work? Yes. Once Ina finally gave that answer, Curator faintly smiled. I like your guts. Then keep that in mind. From today henceforth, you live in the shadows behind society. You must not bring light to the truths you learn through this work. If you were to divulge any of the truths we just discussed, then communicator persecution would likely explode all across Japan. The world would revert to the dark times of 2014. Jeez, what happened in 2014? Therefore, we cannot speak the truth to anyone. You must commit everything to memory, mask your true character, and still come into contact with communicators. You never know when or if the one you're protecting will become a monster. Protection and surveillance are the two sides of the same coin. If you want to protect communicators, you must never let your guard down around them. Keep your distance. Observe them calmly. It's a tough job, but can you do it? Commissioner Ina Tsubakiyama. Ina smiled at those words. Tough? preposterous. It's a job worth doing. And with that, and thus Enas began working as a communicator commissioner. For the 2 following years, she tackled various BC-related incidents alongside Curator and Hika. Commissioner duties had grown considerably in the past 16 years. They were now close to a police or a public safety department. In 2029, they exposed researchers guilty of illegal communicator confinement and experimentation. Victimized communicators were recommended to migrate to government-designated top-secret cities. But there's also times when communicators were the victimizers rather than the victims. Criminals found uses for BC abilities. Empathy, for example, could be used in industrial espionage to gain corporate trade secrets. Enas had sought and apprehended such communicators herself. Throughout those days, she became fully aware of the meaning behind Curator's words. Protection and surveillance are 2 sides of the same coin. Communicators were to be both protected and put under surveillance. To protect herself, she had to take lessons in marksmanship and self-defense. Enas trained her body, and at the same time, she steeled her stoic heart. Alright, we need to wrap this one up here because we're out of time for today, but we will continue with Enas' memories in the next one. Till then, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one.